You are about to discover the secret like no one on earth before. If you've read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich book, looking for the secret in those pages, or watched the movie The Secret, you'll want to take out a notebook for today's interview and put away all distractions. The lessons you'll take away from this next episode, I guarantee from personal experience that what you'll learn today has the potential to change the course of your life forever. Welcome back to Season 10 of the Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning podcast, where we connect the science-based evidence behind social and emotional learning that's finally being taught in our schools today, and emotional intelligence training used in our modern workplaces for improved well-being, achievement, productivity, and results, using what I saw as the missing link, the application of practical neuroscience. I'm Andrea Samadi, an author and an educator with a passion for learning, and launched this podcast 5 years ago with the goal of bringing all the leading experts together in one place to uncover the most current research that would bring back how the brain learns best by taking us all to new and often unimaginable heights. For today's episode number 292, we have a surprise guest who I didn't know we'd have on the interview schedule until this past weekend. After receiving his new book in the mail, I sent out an interview invite, and when the answer came back, "You pick the day," I knew I had to make a decision quickly and firmly. It was our next guest's father who taught me to never waver on a decision. We've all been there, though, wondering, should I do this now or later? Leave it, don't leave it, do it, don't do it, or say it, don't say it. There's nothing worse than being stuck with that feeling of ambivalence that comes from indecision. And if my path hadn't have crossed with motivational speaker Bob Proctor, I wouldn't have learned the importance of eliminating conflict in the mind by learning to become proficient at making decisions. I quickly picked the interview date for 2 days away, and I knew it was the right answer because that's another skill we were taught. Learn to listen to that quiet voice within and always go with your heart. It will never lead you in the wrong direction. Today's guest is Bob Proctor's son, who worked by his side for 30 years, Brian Proctor. And for 60 years, he was schooled with the experiences and wisdom learned by being the son of the legendary speaker who impacted my life and millions of others around the world with his teachings that were all based on the principles of success. Now, I've known Brian Proctor since the late 90s when I was first creating the goals and dreams of my future on notepads, and I was using his father's material as my guide. Brian was right there, encouraging me along the way. I highly recommend his work. He's extraordinarily humble and a uniquely kind human being. You'll see what I mean when we meet him. I haven't seen Brian since I ran into him at the last live seminar I attended around January of 2016 in Los Angeles. And this was 16 or so years since I'd been on staff working behind the scenes with him and all those others in the early days. It's always interesting seeing people you've not seen in years, as you both remember where each other began. He knew me well, and I'd say I knew him well. It's always neat to see where people end up, especially when you work in the personal development industry, as we get to see each other's lives as works in progress. Brian would see my journey over the years just as I'd watch his. And his son, Danny, became an important influence in my family's life, as Danny helped me with many projects along the way, especially when I worked with youth and with the project involved his passion, filmmaking. I did see Brian again after that seminar in 2016 when I took the Paradigm Shift seminar online, and I had the chance to study directly with him and learn more about where his life had progressed to since I knew him all those years ago. But I still had many questions for him that I knew he was asked often. I wondered, what was it really like having Bob as your dad? When you were stuck, I thought, Did he show you the way forward, or did he make you figure it out on your own? Then I thought, how exactly do you feel his influence? And do you still feel him today? And then I wondered what chapters of Think and Grow Rich were important to him the most. I knew some things were mentioned over the years, but reading through the pages of Brian's new book, my questions were all answered, and then I filled in some other areas that I had no idea about. You can watch an interview Brian did recently on Vladdy's Author Show, and I put a link in the show notes so you can see some of the answers to the questions that I've had over the years that come out in her interview. And in the first few pages of the book, you'll see quotes and endorsements from leaders like Brian Tracy, who I've quoted often on this podcast. And I can't even tell you how excited I was to see that Price Pritchett wrote the foreword to this book. And you'll learn how Bob and Price became acquainted. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you'll know how often I quote Price's U Squared book. We covered it on episode 109, where Pritchett covered a high velocity formula for multiplying our personal effectiveness in quantum leaps. And then we covered it again last October with an episode that we called Success is Nonlinear, and talking about quantum leaps, which is a topic I want to dive deeper into in the next few seasons. Today, I'm beyond excited to have the chance to catch up with Brian Proctor and gain access to some of the connections and knowledge that could only be known from those who walk side by side to this well-known and respected speaker. Let's welcome Brian Proctor and see what we can uncover together with his new book, My Father Knew the Secret, Growing Up with Bob Proctor, and use these lessons immediately to improve our life. So welcome, Brian Proctor. It's so awesome to see you today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Andrea. It's great to see you too. It's been a little while. This is really nice.
I know, it sure has. I think the last time I saw you was around 2016 when I went to one of Bob's seminars in Los Angeles. I think so. And then I took one of your seminars, the Paradigm Shift Online. So I know you don't get to see who's all listening, but I feel like I saw you recently just from listening to that.
That's great.
Where are you located? I know you talk about your house on the ocean. Where are you? Are you in the US or?
Yeah, so I'm in the U.S., Pacific Northwest, Washington State.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're right on Puget Sound here. It's absolutely beautiful.
Really nice. Well, Brian, this is an honor for me to get to talk to you about this new book that you've just released. I just got my copy, and I know it's been years since we worked together, and there's a lot I want to ask you, and just a lot of memories from the past, like getting to watch you where you started. And it's fun because you got to see me when I started. We know each other pretty well from the old days, but just to kind of put everything in place that these principles really do work when applied, right?
They really do. I obviously I grew up with Bob Proctor as a father, so I got hit with it right from day one, and without a doubt these principles work. I've seen it work in my life. I've applied everything that my father taught me, and I'm living, honestly, Andrew, I think I'm living a charmed life. It's really, I'm living a wonderful life, and it's because I just step out and I took action on all the principles that I've been taught since I was a little kid.
Exactly. Like I go back to when I first ran into Bob. My mom knew him from Sun Life Insurance, so it wasn't too far off when I started saying, "Oh, look at these principles," and my mom said, "Oh, Bob's been working with all the insurance guys, and they're all hitting their goals with their sales." And so, I had the belief from home, so it wasn't too weird when I said, "Hey, you guys, I'm going to quit my teaching job and go work for Bob Proctor." My mom got it, but my dad just thought it was a little bit off the wall. But creating a charmed life, I go back to that decision, and I created everything that I'd written on that piece of paper and those notes. So I really hope that listeners, really see the seriousness of these success principles, that they've been working for decades before I came across them, and then you applied them, I've applied them. So that's really what I'm hoping that listeners really take away from the lessons here and see how serious they are.
Well, you know what, Andrea, I think back to that.
Yeah.
And I think the courage really it took for you to leave the teaching industry to do that when everything around you is saying, what am I doing? Am I crazy? I've got something here. I've got a career track. I went to school for it, and I'm leaving it to try something else. And I look back on the years and years of all the seminars that my father did and the people that came to the seminars. And so many people were doing things that they maybe liked, but they didn't love. And there was something else they really wanted to do. And, my father, through his teachings, gave people the courage to step out and do what they really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And those people, my gosh, I mean, Andrea, and you're a great example of it. That the people that stepped out and started to do what they really wanted to do and were passionate about, the world opens up in such a big way, and so much more becomes available to us. And like you say, we live a charmed life. You're doing what you love to do, and if it's your own business, whatever, you can earn unlimited income. There's just so many great things to making that decision and stepping out and living the life you truly want to live. That was a big thing that I have always learned. You got to live the life you want to live for you, and take care of obviously those around you, but to live the way you really want to live. It's a great way to be.
Yeah, Brian, it's funny because I remember you not being too thrilled with some of the things you were doing back in the day. You could just
Mhm.
tell, and then you could probably look at me and go, yeah, Andrea's not really living her charm life. There's something else she's supposed to be doing. So it's kind of really neat to sit here and see you now living your charm life, married to the person that just makes you so happy. It's an amazing thing. So let's just get into your book here, because this is why we're here. What do you want people to take away? Like, we're both talking about how we use these examples, and it's just wild to look at it. But what message do you want people to get from reading this?
Well, really, the whole book, I'll show you. I've got a copy here.
Nice.
It's called "My Father Knew the Secret: Growing Up with Bob Proctor." And honestly, Andrew, I'm really proud of this book, and I'm proud of it not because I wrote it. The book really isn't about me. It's really about my father. And what I'm really proud of is, since he passed away, I had been writing this book when he was alive. I started writing it almost 4 years ago, and he was really encouraging me. He loved the fact that I was writing this book. At that time, we didn't know what I was going to call it. I just knew that it was lessons I learned from my father. And the whole purpose of it was really to share a viewpoint with the world of Bob Proctor that nobody really got to see. When you see him on stage or online on YouTube, he's teaching and he's doing his thing, but you never really get to know, who is Bob Proctor? What is he like as a person, as a father, as a friend? And this book enabled me to really share who Bob Proctor was. And I got to share it in a really kind of a fun way for me. The lessons I learned right from when I was a little kid all the way up until, right before he passed. And, I share those lessons in a fun story kind of a format. So it's really nice and easy to read. And then I have consider points at the end that really show how you can apply that lesson, that story, to your own life, and so that you can live a better life. So I really feel that, for me anyway, I think this book really carries on the legacy of who my father was. And I'm really, really just to my core, I'm really happy about doing that. It feels right. It feels good. And, I feel I'm doing it for the right reason. I think it's really good to continue on the legacy of what he was all about.
Definitely. It's beautifully written, Brian. Like, I know your work over the years. It moved me from the very beginning. And then the way that you put the pictures in. And it wasn't just the typical lessons that I would have expected that you would have picked.
Mhm.
And I'll get into some of them with the questions, but some of them were obvious, like how to have a good attitude or how to set goals. You didn't pick the usual ones. You went in a little bit deeper. And that's what I liked, where you picked the sides where we didn't get to see what Bob was like behind closed doors, or, you know, and the beginning part was really difficult. Those final days that only family would see. Bringing that to the world is just a eye-opening to open the book and see how difficult it was in the end, but how he still went and lived the principles himself right up to the last.
Yeah, and I have to admit that that first part was very tough to write. It took me certainly a little while to do that. But I felt it was good to put it in there. I think it's good for people to see what my father was like right at the end when he wasn't doing well, and how he still treated people, what he did. It's pretty special. And I agree with you. I don't think I covered the main lessons that he taught in seminars. And I did that for a reason. It's you can see that everywhere. It's all over YouTube. It's everywhere. I really felt that some of the core lessons that he taught me as his son, I think would resonate with people in a really good way and in a unique way. And I think if people take these lessons and apply it in their own life, you'll see. I mean, you know the difference that it makes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, on page 18, you talk about the timing and writing of the book. And I know how difficult it is. I've had, the documents open on my desktop, and you can hear the kids swimming in the pool, and here I'm supposed to write, like nothing's coming. Even when I write these podcast episodes, it's hard to get the wheels turning. But Bob told you, don't rush it. Take your time and write from the heart. And, he gave me the same advice when I interviewed him, episode 66, a few years ago. He said, you'll never go wrong when you're leading from your heart. Just always listen to your heart. So looking back now, how do you think all of this was supposed to happen? And what did you learn from releasing the book at this time?
Well, I think at the end of the day, things happen the way they were supposed to happen. It's certainly not the way I planned it to happen. I have to be careful I don't get emotional. It was really tough when my father passed. And for who's ever watching that don't know, I was extremely close with my father. We weren't just father and son, we were like best friends, and we talked multiple times every day. And so when I started writing this, he was kind of excited about it. In a fun Bob Proctor way. And, he would kind of razz me, what are you doing today? What are you writing? And then he would give me kind of food for thought on whatever subject I was writing about, which was great. It really helped. And that was the thing. Then he said to me, he says, Brian, don't rush this. Just do it at your pace with what feels right. And he says, if you write from the heart, it's going to be a great book. And I look back on it and I feel like he knew he wasn't going to be here when the book came out, because he just kept saying, take your time, take your time. And it's kind of hard to think of that, but I know that in wherever he is, he's seeing what's going on. And I think he sees the message that I put out there, and it's all good. He never knew what the title was. However, I feel he inspired the title. When Dad passed away right beforehand, he said to me, he says, Brian, please talk to me every day. He says, you'll hear me, whether that's through my intuition or whatever that is, you'll hear my answer. And I took that to heart. So, I do talk to him every day. It's not always easy, but I do. And the title for this book, it came to me in the middle of the night. I dreamed about Dad. And I woke up, it was around 3 a.m. And this title, My Father Knew the Secret, it just hit. I'm sure it was inspired, guided that way. And to the point that I actually got up and went and wrote it down. Because, at 3 a.m, sometimes these things can leave your head pretty easily. And so I went and wrote it down. And, I feel that was his way of guiding what the title was. And it was just such a nice tie to him being in the movie The Secret, and what that did for his career. And I really feel that the title is indicative of the book. Like, my father really did know the secret. He knew the secret to life, and he lived it. He lived it every day. It just felt right. So that's kind of how the book came to be. When he passed, it took me a little while to get back into writing it again because it was really tough. And the first thing I did write was that first chapter. I felt I had to write it while it was still anchored deep. And it's been a project of love. I've really enjoyed the process of writing this book. My wife, Corey, really helped me edit the book, and I feel she brought it even more life into it, which was really, really nice. Corey and my father had a great relationship. So it was a fun process. It was a good process for me. I really, like I said earlier, I'm really proud of what I've written, and I really think, I feel in my heart this book will change lives in a simple way, because people will get the messages really clearly. And like you say, I've put pictures, I put different things in the book that I hope anyway anchor the lesson and the moment. And I think it's well, it's certainly being well received already. So I feel really good about it.
Awesome. There's so much to what you just said there that I could go in a million directions, but I just want to narrow in on a few, because it was Bob that taught me to write down my dreams. Back in the late 90s, he said, I could take a quote from Napoleon Hill, gaff those ideas with a pencil that come in your dreams, write them down because they'll have meaning. And, you did it. I wonder, did he teach you that, or,
Yeah, you know what? Now that you say that,
right.
it's so funny. I remember that. He said that so often.
Anytime.
And I guess that's probably why I did it, because of hearing that so often. But that obviously that's an unconscious thing.
Yeah.
But as soon as you said it, it's like, wow, yeah, that is where it probably came from.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I did that after he said so, and I can go back to the late 90s and pick up on themes and circle themes. I dreamt about writing books and seeing them in teachers in their offices, things like that. And so it would just kind of little messages would guide me along the way in dream world. And so I just thought that was interesting that the title came in a dream. And then another thing is that now that you've written it, do you feel like it was you writing it? This is a hard thing, question to ask, but it came from through you. But you know what I mean? The message, sometimes I'm reading my stuff and I'm like, who wrote this? It didn't come from my conscious. It comes from the heart. It comes from so deep within. Do you feel what I'm talking about with this question?
Yeah. And I can say it was a little bit of both. I certainly wrote it consciously, but there was a lot of moments that things just flowed through, and the message kind of flowed through, and I was just in touch with the message. When I was writing it, I would sit here at my desk and I would just shut everything else off, and I would just really focus on it. And even at times when I was having trouble with what I was going to put down and how I was going to structure a certain paragraph, let's say, my wife, Corey, she had a great suggestion. She said, Brian, don't stress over it. Just close everything off. First thing you do in a day is just write 500 words, just 500 words. That's all you got to focus on. Once you've done 500 words, close up the computer and go off and do whatever the heck you want to do that day. I thought, what a great suggestion. It's very similar to what Dad had suggested before with, if you just took an hour every day to do something focused, you would end up with several 40-hour work weeks of conscious energy towards one thing. And that's kind of what I did. So I then started doing that, just 500 words. And some days I'd maybe write 1,500 words because it really got me into the flow. And other days I wasn't, but I still got the words in. And then it did. Sometimes I was writing, sometimes it was just flowing and guided. But it just, I don't know, felt right. Felt good.
Right. No, I, as you were talking, I could really see it. And I think it'll be interesting because I've got it on my desk. You talked about, I watched Vladdy's interview with you and I thought it was phenomenal. I put the link in the show notes so people can see your other interviews on the book and get different takes. But, just flipping through the pages, there's so much to it. You can look at the pictures, and maybe if you need inspiration on a daily basis, like I would do with Think and Grow Rich, I would open it up and read a little bit. I'm going to do the same with yours now. It's join the stack along with Price Pritchett to U squared, Think and Grow Rich. I got them all.
Yeah.
But so if we go into chapter 1, I know we talked about, the difficult part of it, but if we could talk about who Bob really was, and how he made everyone feel so special. And then I thought about when you presented at the seminars, did you cover the impression of increase? Was that yours?
Yes, I did. I always covered it. It was that was one of the base lessons I think my father taught me as a young child that I've always lived with, and I certainly taught my kids it. So yeah, I can talk about that if you like.
Yeah, so I just wondered because he had this ability to look at everybody and see that they were special, make them feel better off for the fact that he'd met them. And then I just wondered, how did you take that in your life? How did you see that? What did people in the seminars do with that? Because that was a big one.
Well, the cool thing was, and this is something that I think people really need to know, my father was truly the person you saw on stage. Like how he was in private life was no different. He was the same person, and you know that you've met my father, God knows how many times. I look back on that, like you say, that first chapter when I talked about him in the hospital, and my father at the very end, he was not doing well. He was in a lot of pain. He could barely move. He was just not in a great place. The cool thing with Dad was he did not let that dictate how he was going to be or how he was going to show up and how he was going to treat those around him. I've seen, spending so much time in the hospital, I saw some people that were really, boy, they were grumpy with hospital staff and they were nasty and mean. And Dad was just so kind with everybody. I can remember this one nurse coming in and having to put an IV in him. And she his veins, I guess, were not real popped or easy to get to any longer. And she was really having trouble finding this vein. He'd already had a couple IVs in there and she had to get another one in. And she kept poking him and just wasn't coming up with it. And, if you know my father, he doesn't like that stuff very much. And he just laid there and he just said, I forget, I think he said his name or dear or whatever. He put his hand on her hand and said, don't worry about it. You just keep doing what you do. You're doing a great job. You take whatever time you need to do to make this right. And he was just so kind to everybody. It was really amazing. And if I'm to take this back do you want me to share the story of how I originally learned this?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I originally learned the impression of increase, and really all the impression of increase is in its simple terms, it's making anybody that you come in contact with feel better about themselves because they were in contact with you that day. That's it. If you can do that in the world, it's a great thing. Well, I think you know this. I worked in the seminar company in early days when I was a teenager in early 20s. And I felt I needed to leave the company and do my own thing for a while. I needed to make my own mark in the world. So I got into real estate and I started selling real estate up in Toronto. And I did very, very well. My first year, I was setting records. I was in the top 100 for a very large real estate company nationwide or internationally, I believe. And I was doing extremely well. Well, I think it was 1988, 1989. I was in a seminar down in Palm Desert, just outside of Palm Springs. And a fellow by the name of Mike Ferry was putting on this course. And Mike Ferry was a big real estate trainer. And there was probably 2,000 agents in the ballroom, I guess it was. And I was sitting right in the front row. I was just soaking up whatever I could to make me more efficient and better at what I was doing. And Mike actually called me up onto the stage. And he introduced me to the audience and he says, this is Brian Proctor. He's, doing all of this in real estate and he's a rookie. He's brand new in the business. And, he's selling more homes than most of you in the audience are. And it was a nice kind of a pump up, but he said to me what is it that you're doing that's causing you to be such a success so quickly? And I stood there and I thought for a moment and it hit me. It took me back to grade 4. we had moved around as a family quite a bit. I was born in Toronto, so I lived in Toronto for a while. We moved to England. We moved back to Toronto. Then we moved to Chicago, and this was all before grade 4. So I had been in like 3 or 4 different schools already, and I remember sitting in the den in Chicago on Maplewood Lane in Glenview, Illinois. Dad talks about that address a lot because that's where he really dreamed up the whole business of what he did. And I can remember sitting in that den, and I said to Dad, I said, I'm really scared about going to school again, being that new kid again. I just hated being that new kid all the time. And this is when he taught me this. He says, Brian, he says, you go to school and you go out there and you meet people. He says, just put 4 letters across their forehead. And he says, those letters are MMFI. And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, what does that mean? He says, it stands for make me feel important. And he says, if you can make the person who is in front of you feel important, feel better because they're with you, you ask them questions, you compliment them sincerely, be interested in them, you will make all kinds of friends and you will get on in this world in a great way. And I have no idea why, but that really stuck. And that's what I did. And I made friends super easily. He always said, do you ever like going into any place where you get somebody and all they're doing is talking about themselves and they're just on you and on you and on you? And it's like, oh my God, I want to get away from this. And he says, you don't want to be like that. You want to be sincerely interested in them. Yeah. And so that's what I did. And I guess I was doing it unconsciously most of my life. I'm sure I consciously did it back then initially, but it became an unconscious thing. And I didn't realize it until I was standing on that stage in California back in 1988 or 89, what I was doing. And from that moment on, I made it my mission that I would consciously do that even stronger. And boy, oh boy, that opened my world up even bigger. And that's it. It's just, and that's how my father lived. He lived with the impression of increase. Leave everybody you come in contact with feeling better because they were in contact with you. They were in your presence. And if you can do that for people, Andrea, your world is just, it's your oyster. Everything opens up because you will attract so much good into your life. People will want to work with you. They'll want to deal with you, whatever business that is. Opportunities will present themselves because people will want to bring you in on certain situations or opportunities because they just like being around you. And it's a great way to live. That's how my father lived. That's how I live. I certainly see it in my son, Danny, my daughter, Leanne. And it's a great way to be.
I love it. I love all of that. And it's definitely something that I talk about a lot on the podcast. I talk about it like seeing the spirit in another person, see the good in them, and don't see anything else. There isn't anything else because spirit's beautiful. Right. And when you can see the beauty in each person and their potential, what they are capable of, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, and here's the key. Sometimes you can run into somebody that you really don't like or you really don't want to be around. Yeah. But there's always something you can find nice about that person.
Yeah, there is.
It could be just the way their hair is done. It could be anything, and just compliment them on that. And that way it is sincere. If it's something you can truly find that's good in them, and compliment them, and then carry on. But you can do it with everybody.
Yeah. Now, Brian, I got to tell you, because we talked a little bit in the beginning about trying not to get emotional. When I was writing the questions, I couldn't imagine how am I going to do this without tearing up on this interview. And you're talking and I'm watching you and I can see Bob in you coming out through you. Your face changed and I can completely see you as him. And it's just crazy. You know how sometimes you can look at your kids and you can see yourself in your kids. Mm-hmm. I can see him coming through and it just made like tears come in my eyes. I'm like, I better not cry on this interview. This is crazy. Stay focused. But he comes through you like nothing else. It's just amazing. I love it. I love it.
I will say here's another lesson, because I do feel him coming through me all the time. And something I maybe covered briefly in the book, but I didn't go into deep detail, is all on goal setting. And, Dad was always about having a firm goal, something you were striving for, something you were going after. And he says, when you have a goal that you don't know how you're going to achieve it, but it excites you and you're willing to step out and do whatever is necessary to get there, that's when your life dramatically improves. And that's when you bring things to you that you would have never gotten otherwise. And I can tell you very clearly that I've never really cared to be on stage. I did it, or to be teaching, or quite frankly, Andrew, doing podcasts.
No.
But I am embracing it because I know that this is the action taken I need to do to get this book into as many hands as possible. And I've got a big goal for how I want this book to sell. As you know, we don't get rich selling books. So I'm not doing this for the money.
Right.
Yes, I'll earn some money from it, but believe me, it's not very much. My mission on this is to get my father's message out to as many people as possible, because I think there's a great message here. And so I'm willing to step out and do things like this, which is not my normal way of being. And that's also a great lesson. If you're going after something you really want, you will take action and do things in a day that you would never normally do. And that's kind of that's a cool experience. So that's probably why you're seeing that. I feel my father just coming through me, because I'm stepping out and doing whatever it takes.
Brian, it brought tears to my eyes. I'm listening to you talking about impression of increase, trying not to cry here. I'm like, this is crazy, because I see his face right over yours, exactly the same. And you're talking and delivering his message just as he would, and it's hitting me. And I'm going, I gotta bring this up here, because I can see it behind you. The reason why you're doing this and stepping out of your comfort zone and doing all these things that you have to, and you haven't talked about it in anything I've seen, but it's the hourglass. I see it behind you. Could you address this? Why is this so important that it's on the cover?
Well, it's funny. I don't even think I address it in the book.
Oh,
I guess it's subliminal.
it's right behind you.
Unintentionally, yeah. And I've got an hourglass right behind me that's like the one in the book. And I have to tell you, that is a coincidence, which is really crazy. Yeah. My father, ever since I can remember, when I was a little kid on the stage, he would be holding up he had a monster hourglass for quite a while. It broke somewhere, and he couldn't find another one. But he always taught about the value of being in the present moment, where the sand is right now as it's coming through, and living in the present moment. He says, the past, the sand at the bottom, is behind us. It's part of the past. There's nothing we can do about it. He always had a great statement. It always resonated with me. I loved it. He says, you cannot change the time you got out of bed this morning. It is what it is.
Right.
And, we've had all kinds of things happen to us in the past, good and bad. It is what it is. And the big key he taught was to let it go. Especially if it's negative stuff, you got to just let it go. You don't let it form part of your identity. And he said, the future, he says, we have no idea what the future holds. All we've got is the present moment, with the sand that's going through that little piece at the moment. And if we can live more in the present moment and do what we can right now and be present in our lives, with our family, with those around us, our life will be so much better. And that was something he always taught. I never really put that in the book, but the sand timer's on the cover, and it's behind me, probably because that's just, to me, every time I see a sand timer, I think of my father. It was always a big part of his teaching. And so it just became a part of this. Like I say, maybe subliminally in my own head, it's a funny thing, but.
Yeah, but look how all these little things add up. Like the lessons learned, when you apply them, you don't know you're doing it. After time, they just are there. Like when we were setting this up and you said, pick the day. I'm like, well, I better pick it quickly and firmly. Pick the day and make a decision. Let's do it. Because that's just what we were taught. Right. And you're living it now. it's not by accident that the sand timer is behind you and that I noticed it's on the cover of your book, because these are the principles that when you're applying them, you're doing them. And I just want to go to vision a little bit, because it was in Bob's early seminars that I learned how to take an image and make a picture in the screen of our mind. And we taught that to the kids in the youth mentoring, like whatever it is, dream it first. And he'd talk about what a beautiful life it was. And you said in the book, he would even look up and say the ceiling is beautiful. And then I thought, well, shoot, Bob Proctor's ceiling in the front way kind of looked a little bit like Las Vegas or the Bellagio. So he had kind of a different ceiling than I've got here. But, I couldn't help but wonder, what do you think Bob saw on the screen of his mind that could help us to have more gratitude in our heart? Like, how did he look at the world and see such beauty?
Oh, that's a real easy answer, Andrea.
Really?
He lived from a place of gratitude, no matter what was going on around him, business wise, personal wise, whatever. He always looked around in gratitude. He was just grateful for whatever was around him. I think back to sitting in the backyard with him, and I think I did write about this in the book. We sat in the backyard thousands of times. I mean, he was in that house, I think, close to 40 years. He loved his back garden, the backyard, and he just loved sitting there and just watching the birds and the squirrels and the trees and just everything around there. And every time we sat back there, he would just look around and he said, "Bri, isn't this just wonderful? Isn't this beautiful? I just love it here." And he was always grateful, no matter what was going on. And that's where, the ceilings, like, he was sick then. We brought him home, and so he only had a couple of days left. He wanted to go at home. He didn't want to, leave in a hospital. And he was laying in his hospital bed, and while he could still speak, that's when he was looking up the ceiling. He says, "Wow, isn't this beautiful?"
Wow.
And my gosh, the man's about to pass away, not feeling good, and he was still looking at all the beauty around him and appreciating it. There's a lesson there.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that came to my mind was just the peace that he had. And he talked about it in the seminars. He talked about it with his mom, who kept saying, "I'll soon be gone. I'll soon be gone." And I got a picture with Bob behind me with his mom in the front at Gina's wedding.
Uh-huh.
And, so he had such a thought process of peace when it came to when we're all going to go to the other side. And, this was years ago. So, how do you think that the fact that we're spiritual beings with an intellect living in a physical body, how do you think that translates into the peace that he had with the fact we're all still here?
Yeah, it's, you know what, I don't know as I can answer that one fully. I can just say that he was okay with it. It was tough when he left, for sure. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. It was hard. However, he made it easier, which was kind of crazy. He knew he was going, and he was okay with it. He actually embraced it. And, people around him that were, why don't we try doing this or try doing that? And he would just say, "Please, let's just be at peace with this." And he was okay with it. So I can say it's given me a different perspective on death. That's for sure. I'm not as afraid of it as I might have been, because of the way I saw him handle it. And that's kind of the cool thing. And that's really, a big part of why I wrote this book was because of the way he handled things. And that's kind of what I wrote about. It's, everything in it is really how he handled different situations, why he believed in certain things the way he did. And, even right down to death, he changed my viewpoint of it. So that in itself, I think, is pretty good. And he made me okay with him leaving. I can remember, years ago thinking, God, what would I do if Dad's gone? It would just be like, and I would get choked up and think, God, I could never, I was that close with him. And when he left, it was like, it wasn't easy, but I was okay with it because of the way he made it. he was a powerful teacher right up till the very end, Andrea. He really was.
Right. And
Yeah.
now you just have to work on those skills that he taught that
Right.
still there, and you can ask questions. It's just listening and getting the advice that you hear and feel. Do you still feel him around all the time?
I do. It's my wife and I joke. I have two places that I chat with Dad. One is we have a reclining chair in our bedroom overlooking the ocean, and Dad loved that chair. When we used to live in Florida, we had that chair there. He got in and he says, "Oh my God!" He went and ordered one right away to have sent to his house. He loved it that much. So that is one place that I sit and relax and talk with him. And the other is, funny enough, is the hot tub. Lots of times I'll just get in the hot tub and I'll just lay in there and I'll close my eyes and I'll just have a conversation with him. I just open myself up to it. It's not always easy. It's not always easy, but
Yeah.
I do.
And so let's go into what he did for you with Corey, because I just remember what life was like for you all those years. And I remember you coming by and you had such excitement in you. I'm like, wow, I really want to see Brian living his best life. You came by on a motorcycle. I think you came by the offices, and I went out on my first spin, and I think I made you drop me off like miles down the road so my dad wouldn't see that I'd been on a motorcycle. Like, it brought me off all the way up the street because he would kill me. But I just remember what life was like. There was something and someone that was there for you, that it took you a while to meet, and you used the principles. Can you just explain a little bit about how you used what Bob taught us all to do with attracting the right person into your life?
Sure. Yeah. That was, that is probably one of the top questions that he always got asked in a seminar.
Isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. People are coming for what I always thought was business stuff and how to be better at business, how to earn more money. Yet the number one question was, how do I attract that perfect partner? That was always the big thing. And it's really simple. All he says was, you have to get in harmony with what it is you truly want in a partner. And he says you need to start writing out the traits, personality traits, the type of person that they are. And so what I did was I started writing a Word document. I had just come out of I'd come out of a relationship that was really hurtful, was not good. I was not in a great place. And so I took a break. I just thought, I don't need anybody in my life right now. And that's when I moved to Florida. And I just was starting kind of a new version of my life. And I didn't worry about having a partner in my life. Well, a couple of years into it, then I was ready. I wanted somebody special in my life. And I thought, I don't need to bring in somebody that's going to be hurtful again, or keep reliving the same things that I had lived in my past relationship. I did not have a great track record that way. And so I thought, you know what? I need to do what Dad tells everybody to do in a seminar. So I opened up my computer and I started up a Word document. And I started just writing out clearly the type of person that I wanted to be with, how they were, how they presented themselves, how they lived, how they were kind, how they were always coming from a grateful place. Just personality traits that I was in harmony with. And I would write that out. And then every morning I would open up that document and I'd read it. And sometimes I would change things, I would add things. And it became really, really specific as to the type of person I wanted in my life. And I wasn't particularly specific on their physical presence, other than I wanted them to be an active person that were, always out doing things. Other than that, I left it wide open, because it's like you want that connection, that perfect person. And that's what I did. And I started focusing on that. And I started going on a few dates, and they're always just kind of one dates. It was just like, this person isn't exactly what I'm looking for. And it's so funny. So Corey, who is now my wife, we worked together in the seminar company, and we worked together for quite a few years. And I really liked Corey, but we worked together. So, I always felt that that's kind of off limits. And I think my father saw it before I did. And he he started, oh, this is quite a few years ago, when we were doing big events. He said, I want a table off to the left of the stage, just a little bit, that's away out aside from the audience, but that's close enough that's not in the light so I can see the people there. And then if I need something, I can get something. So he had a table set there, and he says, I want Brian and Corey at that table. And we're like, okay. So that was our table at every single event. So Corey and I were always sitting next to each other. And we really became close friends. And we would go out for walks in the morning before the seminars and really got to know each other. And man, I just loved who Corey was. I never really thought about it because of the work thing. But I just loved who she was. And anyways, eventually I had somebody, Gina, who, Gina talked me into, I won't get into that whole story, but Gina talked, it's in the book, but Gina talked me into letting Corey know how I felt. And I did. And the first thing Corey said to me was, well, how is this going to work? I live in Alaska and you're in Florida. And it was like my father flowed through me right then. Dad was still around then, obviously. And I just said, I don't know how this is going to work, Corey, but I said, if you're interested, let's just see. And let's just see how it unfolds. And we'll make it work. I don't know how the distance thing will work out, but I'm sure if it's meant to be, it'll work itself out. Well, when I look back at that time, when I looked at my document, she fit absolutely everything on my document, except for one thing. That was that she lived close to where I lived. And at the end of the day, that didn't matter. And I don't live in Florida anymore. And I'm actually living in a place that I love even way more than Florida. Like I love where we live. And that wouldn't have happened if I had stuck to that one thing. But everything else on that list, Corey is exactly that. And, I think my father saw it before I did, which is okay. That's probably normal. But then, Corey and I got together, and it was like in no time at all. We were, we got married, and life is great. I'm with the absolute perfect partner. And I'm loving life. And it's because, I took action and did one of the simple lessons that Dad taught from the stage that most of us don't do. A lot of times we see him talk about things like this and we think, oh, that's great. And then we just kind of carry on with our life. I actually did it, and it really worked.
And it's amazing to see, because she obviously brings out in you and makes the best in you and you with her. So I just love seeing it. And I saw it when I saw the paradigm shift seminar, when you were talking about it. That's when I first saw it. I thought, this is great. Good for Brian. I'm so happy. But what caught my attention in the book was when you said, don't worry about the how.
Right.
How many times did we hear that? Like, what do you want, Andrea? Well, I want to live in Arizona, and I want to start working on our educational system, because there's a big mess out in the US, and Columbine happened. And, whenever he asked me what I was going to do, and I'd be like, but I don't know how I'm going to do that. And he'd be like, well, you don't have to know how. You just got to know what it is. And I heard that so many times, and I would look at him and go, well, good for you, Mr. Bob Proctor, who has all the answers, but like, how am I going to do that? And isn't it amazing when you look at all the crazy things that you did, like, meeting Corey, and I think about the things that I did. Strange and marvelous things happen to make it all happen. You couldn't have predicted how. There's no possible way. I couldn't have planned it out. It's just all these weird things that, like Bob saying, sit at the table and you got to know each other in a different way. Or, you can't plan it looking forward, only, like Steve Jobs says, looking back, right? There's something powerful to that.
Yeah. And the big thing, and Dad did teach this with goal setting, with anything, if you know the how, how you're going to do it, there's no inspiration in that.
Right.
If you don't know how, but boy, this is something you really want, or something you really want to do, and you just step into it and you just figure it out as you go, there's inspiration in that. And there's growth in that. He always said the growth is in working towards the goal. It's not in the actual getting of the goal. It's the growth that it takes to get there. And if we go after something that we don't know how we're going to do, there's inspiration in that. And we're going to learn things and do things that we wouldn't normally do. And that is that is how we open ourselves up to a much better life.
Now, you just explained in a way that I didn't understand, that diagram where you go from theory to fantasy. You pick the thing that you don't know how you're going to get. You can't go buy the same car that you've already had. There's no inspiration in that. Go
Right.
pick the car that you don't know how to drive, that is way out of your budget, and figure out how you're going to do that. That's where the inspiration is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, I have a couple questions for you. We're coming close to the last little bit here, so I'm going to
Okay.
cut through to some of the questions that I think are really important, because you touched on it. And it was when Bob taught you how to really embrace your feelings and not be afraid. And if I think back to where I was in the late 90s, I was afraid of taking chances, of, getting hurt. Wouldn't never have told somebody how I felt. It wasn't how we were raised. Like, my parents never talked about feelings.
Mhm.
And then we get exposed to, well, what do you really think? What do you really feel? What actions do you want to take? And suddenly it just becomes not so scary. Can you talk a little bit about, what Bob taught you about just embracing your feelings and being open with saying what you really feel?
Yeah, you know what, he just I guess I was really fortunate that way. I mean, I know I'm fortunate to be a son. There's no, that's the easiest way to just say it. Dad always made it easy to talk about your feelings and just be who you were. He always told me how much he loved me. It was never one of those things, as sometimes kids think, God, do they really love me? Or, am I just their kid? And am I, whatever it might be. I always knew how Dad felt. He always showered me with love. And I mean, right to the last days, my gosh, some of the things he told me the last days, like the only person that really knows is my wife, Corey. He said things to me that have touched me so deeply. He was never afraid to just put it out there. And so I honestly, I just learned that naturally, Andrea. It wasn't one of those things that I had to switch. And I feel it's always the way I've been. I think most people will always know how I'm feeling about something. I can't say that I know that for sure. And I'm sure there's times that they don't, but I'm always okay with letting my feelings be known. And Dad just made it easy that way. So I don't really, I wish I could give you some profound lesson around it. I can't, because he just made it easy. I think, if I'm to give any kind of lesson around it, I think as we have children or even close friends and stuff, the more we can just be open with them and open our heart to them, I think the better off you'll be, and the deeper your connection will be. I truly feel that the connection I had with my father was because of how open we were with each other. And I know a lot of father-son relationships are not like that. But I was fortunate to grow up with that. So, yeah.
And we're going to kind of go right back to the very beginning with my final question here before I, come in for a close. But so you talked about how Bob was a pro is at his best regardless. And you talk about it in the book all the way through. But chapter 8, you talked about the chalkboard and how meticulous he was with the chalkboard.
Yeah.
And it brought back a memory of when he sent me on this trip in New Orleans. He said, here's $100. Go bring me back a Sharpie that had a slanted tip. And I was like, what? It was like 7 a.m. Nothing was open in New Orleans except for like the bars. And I was like trying to figure out, where am I going to get a Sharpie? And I found one and brought it back. But it just made me think, when I was reading chapter 8, of how he was a pro regardless of where he was. Just, could you just talk about how serious he was about his craft?
Yeah, so he was very serious about his craft. And that lesson in itself is really powerful, because he had situations where he would show up to do a seminar and there was only a few people in the audience back in the early days. And he would still get up on that stage and he would teach as if the room was filled. He was a pro regardless. He was always at his best regardless. The last 6 months of his life, he was not doing very well, Andrea. He couldn't walk very easily. He was struggling. If you see videos of him at the very end, because of some of the medications he was on, his face was starting to swell up a little bit. He was not in a comfortable place, and he still wanted to reach people. He still wanted to teach. No matter what was going on with him personally, he was always at his best. And I can remember when I was up helping take care of him at the end, he still wanted to do some online sessions for different groups of people. And boy, it was a chore getting him ready to get him out there to do it. It would take time because he was in pain and it was not easy. And we'd get him out to the studio and set him in his chair and then step back and the cameras would come on. And if you didn't know, you would never have known that he was not in good shape. For that 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever it was that he was on and he was teaching. And he always said that no matter what you do your best at it, no matter what's going on around you, how you're feeling. That's it. There's a valuable lesson in that, because if you do that, you're going to get way better in this world. Well, that's how he was right to the end. And he was not doing well. But if you were watching him, you would have never known. He just channeled and did his best and was on, because it was his passion to teach. It was his passion to help people live a better life. It was kind of a cool thing about my father. And, when the session would be done, poof, he would crash. I mean, he would sleep for 4 hours. It was like he was done. But for those of you that saw him at the end on video, on YouTube, wherever it was, boy, he was always on, even when he wasn't feeling on. And there's a powerful lesson in that. And I've always learned that when you do something, do it right and do it well. And no matter what's going on around you. And if you do that, you're going to live a better life. It's really that simple. But most of us, will use all kinds of excuses to not do something or to not do it as well. And Dad never used excuses. He just wouldn't. And that was a great thing. And I know I learned that from him. And when I try to do something, I try to do my best at it. Obviously you have different times that you're better or not as good or whatever. But if you try to do your best at that moment, you're gold. You're gold. And that's how Dad lived. And that is how I try to live as well.
Some very valuable lessons here. This is incredible. Brian, we've reached the top of the hour, so I do have to stop my questions. I could keep going here, but I'll let you get back to your day. What would be your final thoughts here to just close this out? What do you want people to take away? Go to brianproctor.com, get the book, and what message do you want people to leave with?
So, I said in the beginning, this book is not about me. It's about my father. So I have no qualms in saying, please go and get the book. If you go to brianproctor.com, go to Amazon, wherever, you'll find My Father Knew the Secret, Growing Up with Bob Proctor. If you go to my site, you'll be able to get, you can order the book through Amazon or whatever. And I've got some extra bonuses that, I'll be doing live Q&A and doing a couple of different things with the people that want to be there. This book, I know, will change your life. I just know it, because my life is forever changed because I had Bob Proctor as a father. And if you have ever studied with Bob Proctor, then this is a must read. Even if you don't know who Bob Proctor is, I guarantee you this will be a very valuable read, because I show a side of my father that nobody else really knows. My wife, Corey, she always said, Brian, you're the only one that can really write this book. I never really thought about it, but it's true. I'm the one that I was with him from day one. Dad started teaching this when I was a young child. So I've been through the entire thing. And I saw his down times, I saw his up times, and everything in between. And what I share is the personal side of who Bob Proctor was and how he changed my life. And if you get this book and read, the cool thing is you can open this up anywhere and just pick a chapter and read. You don't have to read it from front to back. And, Dad always said, if if you're having trouble with something, you need an answer with something, pick up a good book and just open it up anywhere and start reading, and your answer will usually appear. And I hope that this book will do the same thing. So I would encourage everybody to go out, please get the book. I know that it's a valuable read. You will get lessons that will change your life. And then I would recommend that, even after you read it, go out and get a few more copies and give it to friends and family. Wait until you see it and but I know that you'll want to get more copies to give away. There's that much value in it. Both my wife and I put a ton of work into this, and we feel really good about this product and what this book does. And this is, in my opinion, the most inexpensive way to really learn from Bob Proctor and to learn the life lessons that can change your life, all in a book. You don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for anything. It's just a book. And in this book, it holds everything, Andrea. So that's my final statement. I just really hope that you'll go out and purchase the book, read it, dig into it, and start to actually practice some of the things that I learned in there. You don't have to do it all at once. Not many of us can do everything all at once, but boy, you just start changing one thing at a time. You'll look back a year down the road, you'll look back at how things have changed for you, and you won't even realize how it was until you've done it. And your whole world will be different.
Brian, I've got to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I would never have felt this outside of the interview, but you are completely channeling Bob. Like and I mean, you look like him, you sound like him. I'm sitting here going, is this Bob? Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm looking at you and I'm like, you completely remind me of Bob. He's coming through just as he would. And I think that's wild. Like, I've never interviewed somebody and I'm completely seeing your dad in you. It's just, it's giving me chills, but I just want to thank you for this experience. It, completely opened me up to some new lessons, solidified some lessons that I knew, but didn't really have a handle on as we went through this. So thank you so much. You really should be proud of this book. I encourage everyone to read it. And I also want to thank you for the time you spent with me. I haven't forgotten any of it. You encouraged me years ago to go after my dreams and spend some time with ideas and thoughts and advice for me that I clearly never forgot. So I put it all into practice because I thought, shoot, if Brian's telling me this, I better pay attention. So, I want to thank you for all of that. And, you're just one of those people that's truly humble. Very genuine, very unique. So I hope that people get the book and start to see the message from your side, because I know you're not going to promote yourself the way that Bob might have said, hey, make sure your grandma gets a copy. But, people can do that for you, because really, Bob did give unconditionally to so many. I want the same for you with what you're doing next. I want everyone that Bob gave to come back and help you out with what you're doing. So I want to see you on Lewis Howes' podcast. That's my next goal. I've got the vision of you. Let's see you on Lewis Howes, get the word out there. And so thanks for all you're doing for the world, Brian.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. I really enjoyed this. It's fun. And I do love just putting out the message of what my father was all about. I think there's a lot of value in that. So thank you. And I appreciate your time.
You're doing a great job. This is going to be fun to watch. What an interview. This one really hit me on many levels, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, as it took things full circle for me, speaking with the son of someone who's made such an influence on where I ended up in life, and the obvious impact he had on Brian himself or his close family, as well as the countless others globally who Bob Proctor impacted through his work. It was something else catching up with Brian, revisiting old memories he shared, but also very surreal, especially when he was talking about the impression of increase, and I noticed my eyes were starting to tear up. If you watch the YouTube interview, you'll see it, but it really took me by surprise that as Brian was speaking, I started to see his father in his face. There are so many lessons in this episode, in Brian's book, and especially when we look back at previous episodes that led up to this one. If you haven't listened to my interview with Bob Proctor, you can go back to episode 66 and you'll see where my path began and some of the questions that Bob answered for me. And then don't miss episode 67, where I listed the top lessons I learned from my time working and studying with Bob over the years. But for today's episode, I've got to narrow in on some of the lessons that weren't obvious until after the interview, and it really does show the power and seriousness of this information that Brian writes about in his book. So here's my aha moments and takeaways. The biggest takeaway for me with this interview, besides the fact it felt like I was interviewing Bob and not his son, was the fact that Bob asked everyone, "What do you really want?" And it hit me while reflecting on this interview while I was editing it, that he was trying to get us to think. And thinking is the hardest work in the world, he would say, and that most people don't think. I remember when he first asked me that question, I'd never really thought about it. And I remember feeling like he caught me off guard, and I just said, I don't really know. Until years later, I had some time to figure out I wanted to do something with our educational system and youth, and then I went full force after that, leading me to where I am today. So the first lesson we all learned was to think. And we all have this ability to think, but sometimes we're just too busy, and we forget to dream up new thoughts. We forget to activate our imagination. And then we can learn to dream. And we learned we could create anything we wanted with belief. And then we can strengthen that belief with books like Think and Grow Rich. And then as all we needed to do was to get emotionally involved with what we wanted and then take action. And this was the formula that would describe our attitude, that would determine our altitude in life. And creating a beautiful life was simple if you followed and believed in this formula. And this is where I say that the interview has the potential to change the course of our life forever. If you really believe in what you want, there's nothing other than yourself that will prevent you from achieving it. And it sounds pretty simple and easy to understand, but there's a lot more to it involved that I can see could take us a lifetime to fully understand and apply. And not everyone follows through with what we really want, as life sometimes gets in the way, or we get in our own way. And how many times did Brian say, "I heard it often," but he didn't really understand the significance of certain lessons until he consciously thought about them. And this is why ongoing continual study is crucial with this information as we take it out of our subconscious mind and into our conscious awareness. And I've been working on connecting David Eagleman's work and neuroscience to the fact that there's so much more to our senses than what our eyes can see. And this is where things get exciting for me as we begin to connect the science to these age-old principles. And I wonder for you, do you think, if I were to ask you what you really want, would you have a clear and concise answer? My second aha moment, you don't need to know how you're going to do what you want. You just need to listen to your heart. And Brian mentioned he heard this so many times. Well, you don't need to know how you're going to do what you want to do. And we'd all be stumped hearing that because most people would like to get the specific steps to where they're going to go with their goals. And I thought about the diagram I've covered on this podcast. It's called the creative process, or how you take your goal and you take it from fantasy, where it begins in your mind with your imagination. Then it goes to theory, where you use your reasoning factors to plan your vision and you put it into words, and then you bring it into a fact or reality with action. And this is where the quantum leap idea that Price Pritchett's book covers, as it's with this step that we stretch our goals and we do something we've never done before. Goals are not meant to get something, they're meant for us to grow. I'm sure you've heard this as often as I have. Don't go out and buy the same car you've always driven, or go after the same job you've always done. Don't do something you know you can do. There's no inspiration in that. Don't get stuck doing something you don't really want to do. Stretch and do something you really want to do, even if the masses would think it to be impossible. This is what will take you quantum leaps from where you've always been. This was like when I set sights on moving to the US from Toronto, putting me way outside of my comfort zone, not even knowing the legal process involved when I first said this is what I wanted to do, turning me into a whole new version of myself with this move. Or when Brian, who isn't totally comfortable speaking in public or doing podcasts, he does them anyway with the goal of spreading the word of his father's message, where his heart is involved with this new book, and he's got a vision that I know will take him far past his old identity or the old version of Brian that I remember didn't really enjoy speaking back in the day, and it creates a whole new version of Brian today. These are quantum leap goals, and they're worth getting excited about. Is there something you really want, but it feels like a stretch for you? The key is to write it down and then decide you'll do it. Go from fantasy in your mind with your imagination, then you go to theory, create your plan, and then you go to fact where you turn your fantasy into reality. The final aha moment was to get up and take action. And this last takeaway is that once we know what we want, we've got to do the work involved to get it. And the quote by James Allen that I quoted at the end of our last episode, 291, came to mind when I was writing this. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. There's no way to escape doing the work. Brian said his dad told him to just write a little bit every day to complete this book. One step at a time, until eventually you look up and the world around you has changed with the repetition of doing a little bit each day. If you find yourself procrastinating with something, then I'm going to guess it's not really a goal that stretches you, so there isn't any inspiration with what you're doing. I wonder, do you have a plan in place for your vision? Does your vision stretch you to do something you've never done before? I'd love to hear the aha moments that you had with Brian's interview and what you think of his new book. And with that, we'll close out today's episode. I'll see you next week as we pick up where we left off and prepare for some new and exciting interviews in the month of July. I'll see you next time.